I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today for the first of a series of the Rotary International District 6440 Task Force on Mental Health Initiatives. And we are pleased to bring to you today Brandon Combs. He is the Executive Director of Erika's Lighthouse, which serves primarily in the youth area. And this series will go on as scheduled through June. And there is a lineup of speakers that have been distributed to the district. And certainly we hope to see you on the first Monday of each month up through June. And I would ask as a courtesy to our presenter and other folks on the presentation here, if you could please self-mute. And if you have questions, please hold them till the end of the presentation. If you do not wish to ask those questions yourself, go ahead and put them in the chat box, and I will give them over to Brandon after he's done. This presentation is by design to last approximately 30 minutes. And with that, I will allow Brandon to take over and introduce himself, give a quick snapshot of both Erika's Lighthouse and his history. And with that, Brandon, thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate it. And special thank you to Sharon, who invited me as well, and is one of our awesome volunteers at Erika's Lighthouse. So if there's anything that is not covered, Sharon, as both a mental health professional and a volunteer with us, will be able to kind of help follow up as well if there is anything. So kind of quick overview of me, and I'll start off by making it pretty clear. I am not a clinician, nor am I an educator. So I am a nonprofit executive. That is my role within Erika's Lighthouse. I've been with us for just over 5 years, really overseeing our kind of national expansion that we have been working on as an organization. At the heart, Erika's Lighthouse is a school-based mental health program, and I'll talk a little bit more about our work and what that looks like as we go through the presentation. But we work exclusively at this point with in-school communities, really focused on youth mental health is our expertise. So kicking us off, kind of introducing a little bit about our work and kind of what this looks like. We'll talk a little bit about the status of youth mental health. We'll also get a brief overview of Erika's Lighthouse and then what our role is in addressing this mental health crisis that we will be talking about as we move forward. So, and then there will be time, as Kevin indicated, for question and answer. So there's a lot of data points. Sorry, fire truck just decided to go by. So when you live a block from the fire station. So there is a lot of data around youth mental health right now. There's a lot of news stories. It is kind of very cause du jour among the media as well as donors right now, which is in some ways beneficial as an organization, but certainly for the work that we do is concerning. So from the standpoint, kind of talking about what are some of the key findings, Erika's Lighthouse relies and uses heavily what's called YRBS data, or Youth Risk Behavioral Survey. It is from the CDC, and it is a national survey directly surveying youth on an annual basis. So what are we seeing from 2023's data, which is the most recent? It just dropped this summer. We are seeing 4 in 10 high school students are experiencing persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. 2 in 10 students are seriously considering attempting suicide, and almost 1 in 10 actually attempted suicide. So these are shocking numbers that we are seeing. Female and LGBTQ plus students were more likely than their peers to experience persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, poor mental health, and suicidal thoughts and behaviors. So we can see this is really what we're going into and what we are trying to tackle as an organization, and what, as you kind of begin this journey of mental health conversations and discussions and really diving deeper into it, this is a really like foundational starting point, because if our youth are feeling this and really experiencing these levels of mental health crises and mental distress, it's not going to bode well for what our future looks like in additional conversations. But I do want to dive a little bit deeper into both of these numbers and what does that look like, because it's really important to break out a couple of key pieces. This is still YRBS data, so you're going to see here 2023 data, so from the same slide we just saw. But this is broken down by sex. And so if we're talking about persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness, which we are talking about up at this top chart, you can see a huge huge discrepancy between females and males. So girls in particular in high school are really experiencing significant mental distress compared to boys. Now, 28% for boys is still way too high. I think we can all acknowledge that. But the difference between 53% and 28% is clearly significant. And we see that as well once we go down into the seriously considered attempting suicide number, 20% overall. And again, it is 27% for girls and 14% for boys. So just huge discrepancies. And this continues throughout different populations. So the top left here, we're going to see percentage of high school students who experienced it by race and ethnicity. So you can see particularly indigenous populations and native populations are seeing very high rates at 45%, and Hispanic communities at 42%. The lowest we're seeing is among native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders, and then Asians following behind that. Or just ahead of that in numbers. So, and then we're seeing very, very similar results when it's race and ethnicity among high school students who have seriously considered attempting suicide. So what we're seeing with these numbers is certainly so far sex, and then we're also absolutely seeing race plays a role in what we're talking about. And so we are clearly identifying there are specific subsets of youth that are experiencing mental distress at much higher levels than what kind of other counterparts might be looking at. And this continues even more when we get into persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness from the past year in regards to sexual and gender identity. You can see persistent sadness and hopelessness among the LGBTQ plus population is 65%, just an absolutely extraordinary number, and 31% among cisgender and heterosexual populations. And seriously considered attempting suicide, I mean, 41% again, and 13%. So as we kind of look at these slides, you can start to really see that there are very specific subsets of youth that are experiencing much higher levels of mental distress. And so being sure that whatever programs are being implemented are being inclusive and recognizing this discrepancy is going to be really key to addressing this. I think we can all acknowledge if we could reduce the 65% down to kind of their counterparts at 31%, all of these numbers would shift quite dramatically. So that's just something to keep in mind. But also, what does this look like over 10 years? So we know COVID has played a role, right? So this is persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness over the past year, and this is 10-year level data. So we are certainly what we have all talked about, right, and been concerned with this kind of 2021, we are seeing it with this COVID bump, if you will, and this increase. And so that's something to acknowledge. We have seen a slight decrease, but we are still well ahead of where we were pre-COVID. And I think the other important point that we would make as a youth mental health organization is this trajectory has not really changed, right? We were increasing and we are still on that same path. So from my perspective, I would not be surprised if we got into 2025 and possibly saw a return to kind of this uptick, unless we really start to make some dramatic changes with how we are talking about mental health and how we are addressing it with our youth. So I'm feeling positive. I'm happy this number decreased, but this trajectory line continues to kind of increase, and that should be concerning for us. Particularly the 10-year trend from girls starting at 39% and up to 53% is a significant increase. And this is seriously considered attempting suicide. Again, kind of this trajectory is a little bit more wonky, but we did see this COVID bump, particularly among girls, that we saw in this 2021 year. So just something to kind of keep in mind as we're talking about kind of how do we talk about mental health? How do we address mental health in meaningful ways for young people? This kind of COVID bump, it seems to be subsiding, but that trajectory is still increasing. And I think when we, if we can go, well, can I go back to the other slide? Let me see. I can. So if we go back to this slide and we're talking about it, right? I think about this as like the warning sign, right? And then of course, seriously considering attempting suicide is a significant, but this is a precursor number and the precursor numbers are still high. So I think it's something for us to know. If we can start to see these start to drop, we can start to see an overall improvement among youth mental health. So With that kind of knowing that data, knowing we are still in a mental health crisis, right? Numbers have improved slightly, but they are still up from pre-COVID. So I don't think we can by any means say that we are out of the woods or that we are in a situation that is acceptable for our young people in any way. So really, who is Erika's Lighthouse? So Erika's Lighthouse, we believe every student deserves good mental health. And we're a national nonprofit on a mission to provide free mental health literacy, depression education, and suicide prevention programs to any school anywhere. And when I say any school anywhere, I mean that we are in 21 countries. Last year, we impacted just over 2,400 schools around the world. Vast majority of those naturally being within the United States, because that is where our cultural competency lies. Quick history about our organization. We were founded in Winnetka in 2004. So we just recognized our 20th anniversary this past spring. We were founded at the loss of Erika, who died from her depression when she was in middle school. And if you remember at that time, that was Erika was unfortunately the second death by suicide in our community that school year. And so really the surrounding community came together and really said never again, and really put us into action to really make sure that we can start having these conversations, normalizing dialogue, reducing stigma, promoting help seeking for our young people and in their families. So when I talk about school-based programming, I get a lot of questions. Where do you work? What does that mean? A lot of people ask me about treatment, and we don't do treatment. So just to be very clear, we are prevention. So when I say that in schools, they address kind of mental health programming along this kind of model. So it's called MTSS. It's multi-tiered systems of support. So some of you may work with your interact clubs within schools. So that would be an example of the same kind of work that we're doing in a different subject matter, right? So that is a universal program. That is tier 1. Every student is impacted and every student has the ability to participate if they choose. So Erika's Lighthouse is working within these two areas, this foundational and this tier 1. So we are implementing multiple different levels of programming within schools, but all of it is universal. All of it is impacting every student, every family, and every educator within that building. Now, we have a referral card system. And so we do help identify kids that may be experiencing mental distress or experiencing depression or suicidal ideation. So if a student returns a referral card, they have the opportunity at the end of our program to say, I want to talk to an adult in 24 hours, within a week, or I don't need to talk to an adult. Best practice, of course, would be that every student completes that card so nobody gets called out. But if a student does want to actually talk to a trusted adult within their school, they're referred to a school counselor. And at that point, they typically would be moved into like maybe a tier 2, depending on what it looks like. So that would be small groups. So it's somebody that's been identified. That would be kind of what we would consider kind of a traditional intervention or a traditional treatment within that school building, right? So it might be a referral out. It might be talking to the family. But something's going on and they need a little bit more TLC than what a universal environment or a classroom environment is going to be able to provide. This model is used for everything, right? So even if it's math, if we're talking about math, everybody has math curriculum, but if a student's struggling and they need extra support, they're going to move into tier 2 for like tutoring or something, right? And they're going to get a little bit more TLC. It works the same way with mental health in schools. And so that's kind of what we talk about with our school communities is what more can you do here? Because if you build a strong foundation and a strong base, you're going to have less students in tier 2 and more students and more families being able to take control of their mental health and manage their mental health on their own. So Erika's Lighthouse has a unique program model in that we are implementing what are called our 4 pillars. So classroom education, empowerment clubs, family engagement, policy, and staff training. And then we have wraparound supports that are really underwriting that work even more. So I'm going to go through those briefly just so you can kind of get a feel for what this would look like within a school. So classroom education is usually our main entry into a school building. We have 3 levels of curriculum. So this is a classroom-based intervention. Students are learning this within a traditional classroom setting. So from level 1, which is upper elementary, grades 4 through 6, all the way through level 3. These are fully bilingual in English and Spanish. And again, mental health literacy, depression education, suicide prevention programming in schools. I got a couple of minutes. This is a brief version of the video. If you cannot hear this correctly, please let me know.
Negative. Cannot hear it. No. No audio.
Okay, there's no sound. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Sometimes Zoom is difficult for me to work with. So you can watch this on our website. We do have different versions that people can see, but this is kind of what it would look like within a student. So we have different videos or students interacting in videos, really showing different kind of levels of diversity and opportunity for students to really kind of have that conversation that we're looking at. So we also have empowerment clubs or good mental health clubs. So similar to Interact clubs that are really service clubs, these are good mental health clubs. So these are clubs that are promoting help seeking, promoting awareness and engagement with students within their buildings. So we have official Erika's Lighthouse clubs, and then we also have affiliate clubs. So this is an opportunity if any of you are working with affiliate clubs or have opportunities beyond that, for instance. We do have a formal partnership, for instance, with Key Club International, which is a part of Kiwanis. So within that, every Kiwanis club can actually internationally can become an affiliate club with Erika's Lighthouse and have good mental health activities within their schools through their existing Key clubs. We'd be very open to kind of Interact clubs having a similar model, but official Erika's Lighthouse clubs actually receive funding from us to implement activities in their buildings. We also have a partnership with SAD, or Students Against Destructive Decisions, as well. Family engagement resources, we have family workbook series all the way from We All Have Mental Health, which is literally just how do you promote good mental health in your home or with your grandkids or your kids. And then all the way to workbook 2 really is kind of how do you talk to your kid? I'm concerned about them. What should I be looking out for? And 3 is getting help. Like we know something is going on. What's the difference between a social worker versus a licensed professional counselor? And that's going to really be in this getting help section. We also have workshops. These are all in English and Spanish as well. We all have mental health as a family workshop, and then depression and suicide as a workshop, pre-recorded, or schools can use them and create their own workshops. And then we do staff training, individualized and group training. We have staff training modules that schools can pick up and utilize themselves when they're talking about to their own staff about, what if you're the trusted adult in your building and you're a math teacher? What are you supposed to do? What does that look like? We also have staff well-being activities. So things that staff can use within school buildings to promote their own good mental health, because we know if we're not mentally healthy, we're not going to be able to help other people get there. So what does that look like? And then we also do school policy. So how do you start a mental health task force in a building? What can an general educator do about accommodations if there is a student experiencing mental distress or somebody that's been diagnosed? What kind of accommodations can that teacher provide in a classroom to make life a little bit easier for that student? We do school-wide campaigns. So Give Voice, this is a Key Club SAD activity with us as well for Suicide Prevention Week. We do a positivity pledge for May, which is Good Mental Health Month. We also have a Teen Toolbox. This is a self-guided opportunity for students to really go through their own psychoeducation opportunities, really focused on help seeking and how do you talk to parents? How do you talk to a peer if you want to talk to them about mental health? And then 5-minute mental health breaks through our mental health recharge. These are really great, really easy. It is a free app. You can kind of access it immediately there. Great opportunity if you see somebody that could just use a quick, 2 to 5 minute mental health break. There's over 50 different coping mechanisms that can be leveraged in a classroom or a one-on-one setting, or use it yourself to kind of help just give yourself a recharge. So that's completely free as well. And then we have this amazing new data center. So schools, all of our programs have pre-post surveys, and schools can actually go in and look up their own specific local or district level data to see their own students' results and what's happening within that school building. So just trying to really make it easy for schools to have meaningful conversations and really understand what that data looks like and what can they do to be improving programming in their building. And then quickly, culture framework, just how do you promote a good culture? What does that look like? What pieces need to be in place? And so again, program model is this. And then if you wanted to look, you can create a free account at any point. If you wanted to look if there were resources, find anything you wanted to leverage yourself, it is completely free of charge. We encourage anybody to kind of go and take a look and see if there's anything you may be able to use in your home or in your own practice or in your own life. So with that, kind of love to see if there's any questions.
I would say if anyone has a question, I'm going to change the view here so I can, if you want to raise your hand, I would appreciate that. In the meanwhile, thank you, Brandon, for that comprehensive presentation in a short period of time. That was really well done and a lot of information. I can think about 30 questions myself, but I'll certainly defer to the questions that have come up. In this first question I have is from Mike Quirk, and I think it goes back pre-COVID. And the first thing I thought when you started talking about COVID as like the benchmark, I started thinking about what about before COVID? Because if I'm recalling correctly, there was a lot of concern about already a crisis in youth mental health prior to, and that is relative to the online situation, social media, in the great wide world web. So I guess the question Mike has specifically is, what was that comparable, and where did was it a comfort zone prior to COVID, or were we already considered in crisis?
Yeah, so I think going back directly specifically with social media, like I don't have that data in front of me. I would have to kind of go back and look that up. I know there's a lot of questions about social media and technology among youth, right? I will say specifically relating to social media, the data is very, very mixed right now. So there is no clear distinction that it is specifically social media or a specific platform or a specific technology, or is it cell phones in general, as like Anxious Generation might indicate. Right. So it's a very mixed bag. We are really like patiently waiting for what that data says as well. And kind of before we make too much of a move, what we would say is we always look at things positively and proactively. And we would say we need digital literacy education, right? I think it's this idea social media, technology is not going away. I think even if we look at technology, I always, we talk about taking phones away from students, and whether in schools, and then we hand them a laptop. So they can work all day on a computer, right? So it's a little bit of a kind of even mixed communications, and we're giving youth to kind of say less screen time, and then we're forcing kids to be on screen time while they're in school. The CDC's recommendation is still around screen time, similar to what has been for decades, around kind of limiting intake of whether it's TV, the internet, but we also know that social media has had an impact. We know that students' brains have definitely kind of been rewired from what we would be used to, but what that impact is and looks like in a meaningful way on youth, we're waiting to see. But what kind of pre-COVID numbers, we do see this as a 10-year. So we have seen this kind of continued uptick. I can go back and try to see if I can find CDC data kind of social media. But what that would look like, I honestly don't know. Kids are completely different then, right? Like I was in college when social media started coming out. And so from that standpoint of like even having computers on a regular basis is different. One of the things I think is fascinating is what we also know from YRBS data, which I did not share, but it is comprehensive, is bullying is actually down, right? We see substance use in youth is down. And so all of the traditional precursors that we would normally be seeing around mental distress in youth is actually kind of flipped a little bit from what we would see, where we're seeing increased levels of mental distress, but reduced bullying and reduced substance use. And so how do we kind of recognize that? How do we make sense of that data into ourselves and what we are doing? And what does that mean? So that's a really challenging, where I know when I was in school and in high school, like underage drinking was very, very high. Bullying was very, very high in self-reports, and mental distress was not as significant at that time. So.
Yeah, thank you. Once again, very comprehensive. There's a question about where your operations are. Obviously, your worldwide office is is local here. But what about opportunities for other than the local Rotary Club there to volunteer? Is there an interface that clubs throughout the region? And if you're not familiar with our district, 6440 encompasses basically Lake County and what I call the collar counties, right? We've got a little bit of each county around us. where might people interact with you?
Yeah, so for us, we do struggle with that group volunteerism or one-on-one. So we are school-based, right? And we know, especially since COVID, getting into schools is very difficult, and kind of what that experience is for volunteers. One, I know it's like every nonprofit in the world is going to say this, everything we do is completely free of charge. So donations are always welcome. We are growing quickly. Our program has expanded about 7 times its size since I started about 5 years ago, and our scope and reach, and our budget has increased by about 3 times. So we've been able to keep up with the program demand, but that's certainly an area. We do also, and I can share it out either with Sharon or Kevin, whoever is appropriate. We do have some kind of workplace things that would be relevant as well, and some group volunteer activities that you may be able to do that would be more supportive for a local school around mental health, but not necessarily directly to Erika's Lighthouse, which at the end of the day, we're all here for the same purpose, right? So opportunities to possibly put together goodie bags or welcome back kits or something for schools around mental health, that might have some good mental health activities, leveraging some Erika's Lighthouse resources that you could give to a school or give to a community-based organization, would be along those lines. So really for us, it's how, if you want to get involved with us at a larger level around fundraising and development networking, we would welcome that. If you really want to get more involved in mental health in your local community, we would really start local, right? Talk to your local school community, talk to your local school counselor, see what resources that they may be needing or leverage within their local school community, to make a difference among youth mental health.
That actually brings up a question I had, and this we hear all kinds of things in the media, right? And one of the issues that I recently was listening, I can't remember where, was a conversation about how there is a challenge with a lot of non-professionals trying to treat people with mental health, and that gets into our educational programs, and you're front line there. And so I think the question I would have is, for a concerned parent, what would we send them to in terms of resources? Because some people don't want to go to a counselor, right? So is there any resource bank that you have, or any direct referral that you might make for the individual parent who we may come across with, who has concerns about their child's mental health, without going to the school who they may have questions about, or without going directly into counseling? For the
Yeah, I mean, not to sound, self-serving, but I would say check out our family engagement resources. So our workbook 2, which is about concerned about a child, is very comprehensive, but still in 9 pages. It's written by parents for parents. It really is a great resource. One of the things that we do talk about in there is this idea that, like, we know recent research and data has shown that sleeping well, good nutrition, exercising can be just as effective as a traditional therapy program, and is even more effective when coupled with therapy, right? So that is a big piece. We also know medication is an option, although we would always say it should be in combination with therapy. But start with that. From there, I think I would also say, like, talk to a pediatrician, right? And that would be a great place to go. And they can talk about medication options. What does therapy look like? What are other considerations? But pediatricians can assist within this process. They might not always be the experts in it, but they can certainly help facilitate what next steps may be, or what other communities resources may exist for that family.
And I love that, because that's a trusted professional, hopefully,
Absolutely.
that they can go to, other than all the banners out there that are trying to sell you something right now.
Yep.
On said internet. But I have a couple more quick questions. We may go a couple minutes over, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Brandon.
No worries.
Let me go ahead and clean up these questions, and they're great questions. I don't want to miss out on any of them if possible. Ellen has asked a question about the connection between the political cycle, which I'm sure with adults it's an issue, but certainly that, and the question asks about students of color around election time. So I would say that would be any marginalized group, in my mind, around election cycles. Is there any data on that? It's an interesting question. Not sure you'd have that at hand, but thought I'd
Yeah,
ask.
I mean, I don't have the data, but I can give you at least some insight from what we've seen from other studies, not necessarily relating to an election, but we certainly have a lot of data around climate change, right? And we know young people are very concerned about climate change, but I also know, if we're to believe political polls and kind of general polls among young people, we also know young people are even more polarized than we are as adults. We're seeing overwhelmingly, for instance, young girls being much more likely to vote for a liberal versus young men are much more conservative. And so this polarization, even among gender in their own age groups, is really stark right now. And within a population that is not as experienced and qualified to navigate through these situations, I mean, we're not doing overly well as adults. So if we're expecting young people to do really well, right, that's double challenge from their part. So we definitely can see that. And I think one thing that came out from this latest YRBS data and other data we're seeing around students of color that's fascinating, particularly in African American boys, we're seeing a very sharp uptick in suicidal ideation. It is still below kind of what the white mainstream is, but it's a sharp uptick. And so what the CDC language has adopted is really this idea of students who have faced discrimination. So similar kind of, Kevin, to the language you were using, right?
Right.
And so certainly we're probably going to see some of that in kind of more challenging situations and cycles, whether that's around election time or it was around George Floyd during COVID, right? So those kind of heightened periods, we're going to see increased sense of discrimination. And we're certainly seeing that in regional communities, certainly around kind of where there are more conversations around transgender rights, or conversations in schools. We're seeing significant upticks in those students in particular. So
Right. So it's more than anecdotal. There's obviously a whole bunch of data to support those issues, or those issues do exist. So thank you for that. Another question from Mariana. Teen statistics relative to adult statistics. And I guess she's referring to the COVID benchmark again. And she notes that the school she worked, there was a high number of orphaned home. Oh, that's a different question. So how about the teen stats versus adult stats? Do you
yeah,
have?
I don't have those in front of me. I know that
Okay.
youth stats are much worse than adult stats, kind of generalized, but we have seen upticks in adults as well, for sure. But it's definitely not the same level that we're seeing in youth right now.
Okay. The second part of her question, I think you sort of addressed it in my previous question about marginalized and at risk, I would say, communities as well. Mariana notes the school I worked at had a high number of orphaned homeless students living in blended family whose situation was hard to improve outside the school, and how to address that.
Yeah, so we actually just came up, and I'll try to get this shared out as well, a new help-seeking study from Erika's Lighthouse that actually uses our own pre-post data from the last 3 years of our programs and compares it to the schools leveraging our programming. And we saw some really dramatic differences from the standpoint of a Title I school or schools with high racial kind of breakdowns, as opposed to typically kind of or traditional white schools or majority white schools. One thing, I also used to work in homeless services, so I can recognize kind of the challenges within this population. I think one of the things that I would really say within this situation, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is real, right? And so when we are talking about what mental health looks like, or we're talking about homeless youth, it's a huge challenge. But there also is that, they might just be trying to put food on the table, or pay rent, or keep housing, or keep some sense of stability. And so that is really challenging. Our recommendation from that standpoint, one, the school can absolutely do more. We see this continuing decline in trusted adults, or students recognizing trusted adults as they get older, right? Like, it's pretty high in elementary, middle of school, it starts wavering, and then kids get into high school and they are really not identifying trusted adults in high school buildings, right? And so that's one of the key pieces for us, is how do we make sure every student has a trusted adult? So schools have a role to play with that, but we also know CBOs have a role to play, or community-based organizations. So Boys and Girls Clubs have a role. We have a CBO program, or a community-based organization program Boys and Girls Club can implement around mental health, but let's normalize that conversation in multiple environments, and so that kids do have somebody that they can go and talk to about mental health. And there's some huge gaps. So quickly, from our own data, we know that 93% of young people can identify a teacher or somebody at school as a trusted adult. And post our program, so it improved dramatically, but only 50% of them are actually willing to talk to a trusted adult about their mental health, right? So there's a 43% gap from that identification, from that willingness to talk. But pre-Erika's Lighthouse, that number was 37%. So even worse. So it's 13% of students said they would be willing to talk to somebody at school about it, but it was still a dramatically low number, right? So this kind of, and then in the community, it's even worse. So it's like 78% can identify a trusted adult in the community, and it's like 30% are willing to talk to a trusted adult in the community about it. So these are gaps that need to be filled, and that we need to kind of cover and make sure students feel supported.
Perfect, thank you. And there's just, I think, one more question here, with respect for your time, and certainly do appreciate your staying over here. I'll go ahead and throw that out there. It is about the curriculum. It's about what is the time involved for curriculum implementation? And I imagine that's a can of worms too, with the multiples of programs you have. But it's let's say a classroom engagement. How would that appear?
Yeah, so classroom education, specifically with our curriculum, we always say we're in 2,400 schools nationally, and no school uses us the same. We're big believers in adaptability. We do have a one-day lesson in the curriculum that we know is effective from our pre-post, but it can go all the way up to a 4-day curriculum if it's chosen to. So one of the unique things about our curriculum is it is skills-based, which means it meets national health education standards. So the day 4 is actually an assessment for skills-based. So what skills did those kids learn through project-based kind of learning, basically, in that day. So a traditional kind of curriculum, if it's not in a health education and it's being done by a social worker or by a mental health professional, is anywhere from 1 to 3 days. We have some schools, though, that are extending that to 5 days because we have a number of what we call them optional program additions. So we have like a Jeopardy game about good mental health. Some schools are actually using the Teen Toolbox, that self-guided psychoeducation, as an opportunity to then have kids kind of go through it on their own in the classroom, and then either have a group discussion or homework aligned with it as well. So lots of flexibility in what a school feels like they need or they want to kind of adapt that curriculum to where it's going to be most impactful for them.
Perfect. Well, wow. You do good interview, Brandon. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. You get into some details without getting lost in the weeds too much, which is a great point, because as we all know, every door is a can of worms when it comes to mental health. So the comprehensive, I would say, coverage that your programs have just for youth and focusing on schools is amazing. And it really displays sort of the array of opportunities that we have as a Rotary District to interface with mental health providers. And we have a lot of people in Rotary District 6440 with our just under 2,000 members who are professionals in the mental health and or just the medical community, who are on a regular basis interacting in that realm, I would say. So thank you so much for your time today. We would love to have you back at some time. I'm sure Sharon is interacting. You mentioned something about getting information over to you. If you could just channel that through her, that would be fantastic. She is on the task force on the mental health initiatives at the district here. And then for everyone who's here, I know today is the 7th of October 24. But over the next several months here, on the first Monday, we are going to continue this program. So please do tune in. And then ideally, we'll have this posted as well on district media and or the website. So with that being said, I do thank everyone for your time. The website is Erika's Lighthouse. Just Google it. It's ericaslighthouse.org. If you want to check that out, you can find out a little bit more about everything and a lot of the resources, comprehensive. They have a really good homepage with some scroll downs on there. And Brendan, any last words for us?
No, I did see Sharon kind of addressing that again. I think as a club, kind of as a Rotary, I would, again, that would, I think local, if it's outside of fundraising. And so I will share out we have a workplace toolkit that can be used for clubs as well. That's really like, what are some activities clubs can do to help create, wellness kits for students in schools around mental health, and share resources, I think would probably be the most impactful, particularly if it's really outside of our area, where we just don't know local resources, right? But the other one I would say is if there are Interact clubs, like we would love to work with them. If there are Interact clubs that are passionate or interested, we also are diving deeper with Key Club as well as with Kiwanis in doing some staff training, and they're leveraging some of our staff training resources, and what does that look like as well. So I think there's certainly other partnership opportunities from that standpoint that Erika's Lighthouse would be happy. I know that a lot of you are working in schools or with folks, and we'd love to there is a role for us to play. Keep us in mind. So
Hey, this is
outside of
Lyle.
that,
Just
thank
one
you all
thing.
so much. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Lyle, do you have a last question?
I was just going to say, thank you for mentioning Key Clubs in Kiwanis. You know, Kiwanis really does have a focus on youth. And if you've got a Kiwanis group in your community, it's not a bad idea to reach out to them and see if there are some collaborations we can do with them between Interact and Kiwanis.
Fantastic.
Right.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thanks again, Brandon. Be well.
Thank
and
you all.
everyone else,
Appreciate it.
Great stuff.
Be well.
Take care.
All right.